The following story mentions cases that involve satanic entities. If you're sensitive to such material, please proceed with caution before listening to the following accounts. Listener discretion is advised. I will begin the episode with a little personal background before going into the most terrifying case I have ever heard. One that has reached millions of people already and yet remains as one of the most puzzling cases in radio history. Something that might just prove the existence and power of evil entities that surround us. My name is Edwin, and here's a horror story. I must have been 7 or 8 years old, sitting in the backseat of the car in the stretch between Tijuana, Mexico, and Los Angeles, California. The night was dark, one of those times and spots where you could actually see the fields of stars. They were contrasting with the ocean to the left and the hills to the right. My dad was flicking through the radio when I heard it. It was a case of a woman who had called in to tell the host and the listeners about a doll that, her son claimed, would walk on its own. The host asked questions and the woman continued, answering the questions in great detail. The show, being transmitted from Mexico, was in Spanish. I, of course, had no idea if what they were sharing were true stories or something of some type of fictional show. I was a fan of Goosebumps and scary stories to tell in the dark at the time, but then I heard my mom say something. Bájale, se va a asustar el niño. Turn it down, the boy is going to get scared. But it was too late. I was already pretending to be asleep as I heard the woman's account. I had to look it up much later as an adult, as scary stories and writing gigs started coming more often, and I was asked about my origin story. What inspired me to go after scary stories like these? And I found it. That tale I heard that night is called La Muñeca Maldita, the cursed doll. And here's what it was about. Angelica was recounting her disturbing experience involving a mysterious doll. It was found abandoned near her home by a ditch. At first, she was charmed by its beauty, so she decided to bring it inside and gave it to her daughter. But shortly afterward, her 6-year-old son began claiming that the doll would move on its own at night, to laugh eerily and walk around the house. Angelica initially dismissed her son's fears, believing that he was simply imagining things to avoid sleeping alone. But everything changed one night. Angelica herself heard heavy footsteps and a chilling, sinister laughter. Frightened, she witnessed a doll inexplicably falling into the middle of the room. Electronic devices in the home also started behaving strangely, such as a cell phone repeatedly activating itself, saying, "Can I help you?" Now, Angelica was convinced that her son had been telling the truth all along, so she quickly disposed of the doll and decided to move her family out of the house immediately. Once relocated, the paranormal phenomena completely ceased. And reflecting on the experience in the call, Angelica expressed deep regret for not believing her son earlier and acknowledged the frightening reality of what they had encountered. Of course, after hearing this story, I was hooked. And yet, still a kid, I could not listen to these stories alone. The show would pop up at night, usually was set up by my dad as we heard the stories. Some callers talked of strange noises, while others mentioned possessions. But there was one in particular I recently heard again on an airplane, since these stories have been turned into podcasts and it still gives me the chills. The show is called La Mano Peluda, or The Hairy Hand. It was a show where the callers would contact the host, a radio personality, Juan Ramón Sáenz, who brought up the show to stardom because of the format. People would call live and tell him about their paranormal encounters. And when I think about it, it's pretty interesting. I mean, in an interview I did a couple years ago in Mexico City with the show Morras Malditas, they found out about my encounter as a kid with the radio show, and they were glad to find another child of La Mano Peluda, another listener that was traumatized by the show enough to pursue a career in the paranormal field. And as you may already know, I also write fiction stories and host my own paranormal podcast with callers, who also tell me their terrifying stories every week. But this show, I believe, became a victim of its own exploration. Though many stories circulate on the internet as to why it ended and what happened, there is a consensus that the beginning of the end was an episode called El Caso de Josué, Josué's case. Now, I must warn you again here. When I listen to stories from Mexico, there is a natural cultural shift that happens, at least with me. Suddenly, stories of ghosts aren't things that I have to prove to you. I already assume that you'll believe me. And since we no longer have that barrier, we can truly dive into the darkness for as long as you can tolerate it. Some people, as I've heard from multiple accounts, struggle with leaving it, being haunted and sometimes even dying from exploring something they should have left alone. But here's a summary of El Caso de Josué, an episode where this caller got in touch with the host. It moves pretty fast, so if you want to hear him tell it directly and you understand Spanish, I'll leave a link for the episode itself. Here's what happened. Josué Velázquez from El Monte, California, called into the show seeking help after experiencing disturbing supernatural events. It was following his involvement in demonic rituals. It turns out that at the age of 14, his family's severe financial crisis led Josué to desperately seek wealth through occult practices. He discovered witchcraft books detailing how to summon demons, specifically a demon under Satan's command. After about 1.5 years of unsuccessful attempts, he finally succeeded. The demon initially appeared as a thin black man who began teaching him spells, curses, and other forms of witchcraft, instructing Josué to perform animal sacrifices and rituals alongside 6 classmates. Now, these demonic demands escalated dangerously when Josué was instructed to kidnap and sacrifice a newborn child, an act he prepared for, but ultimately did not complete. Instead, he became skeptical and consulted witches, shamans, and spiritualists seeking guidance. His involvement continued, leading to another invocation in his home, one that resulted in a terrifying supernatural attack. His mother was physically assaulted by a grotesque, bipedal, pig-like creature. After that, Josué experienced even more extreme paranormal events. He was spiritually transported to a cave and held captive for 21 days by shape-shifting entities. During this period, he received a powerful object, the Ring of King Solomon, believed to command demonic spirits, but at a steep price. To obtain this ring, Josué was required to sacrifice a family member, and finally he ended up choosing his elderly grandmother. He drugged her, performed the ritual, and then he obtained the ring. And even though he didn't explain exactly what he did to the body, he said that mysteriously no physical evidence remained on her body afterward. Now, despite the supernatural rewards, Josué then started living a tormented life. He received substantial daily amounts of money, like around $15,000 a day, which he must spend entirely that very same day. He was not allowed to donate or give away charitably without severe demonic retaliation, which he painfully experienced after attempting to help a troubled construction worker. Immediately after he gave away the money, he was violently attacked by a demonic apparition, one that appeared as a thin woman with long black hair and no feet, one who frequently assaults him physically and emotionally. Josué acknowledges that despite gaining financial wealth, paranormal abilities, and rapidly advancing academically, becoming a licensed bacteriologist and a parapsychologist at only 20, he has found no joy or satisfaction. Instead, he experiences continuous fear, anxiety, and regret. He declares a strong belief in God and desperately seeks liberation from the evil pact he made, repeatedly calling out to God for forgiveness. This is all happening during the call. And you can tell he's struggling to overcome the presence and power of these dark entities right there, live for everyone to hear. Now, the radio host and a pastor intervene during the call, leading Josué through intensive prayer and a spiritual deliverance process. Together, they kind of guide Josué in renouncing Satan and openly accepting Jesus Christ and reciting biblical psalms. Throughout the emotional session, Josué suffers extreme physical and psychological torment. He even vomits and experiences severe pain. This is all happening as demonic entities aggressively oppose his spiritual liberation attempt. You can actually hear voices and objects moving on the line. He's actually interacting with them live during this recording. Listeners worldwide join the collective prayer, offering spiritual support and encouragement. And eventually Josué is calmer, though deeply shaken, and he resolves firmly to seek ongoing Christian help and spiritual counseling. He expresses profound gratitude to listeners and the radio host for their prayers, hoping that his next public appearance will be to share his complete liberation and testimony of redemption. Eventually, the radio host updates listeners that Josué is currently receiving both psychological and spiritual care at a monastery in Los Angeles, California. Still, he's urging people for continued prayers for him. But the story, as we'll find out, was far from over. After 15 years on the job, the host, Juan Ramón Sáenz, decides to end the project of the radio show. Instead, he begins his own show called air.Normal on a network known as TV Azteca in Mexico. Unfortunately, the show would not last very long. Nine years after his chilling confession on the radio show hosted by paranormal investigator Juan Ramón Sáenz, Josué resurfaced and agreed to a televised interview with the air.Normal team. And this interview was significant because it marked the first time Josué publicly appeared after nearly a decade of isolation and spiritual struggle. Now, given the seriousness and potentially dangerous nature of the case, Josué set strict conditions for the meeting, ensuring it would take place in complete secrecy and isolation. The location itself was kept secret, even from the crew, until shortly before filming. The interview occurred on a secluded boat, floating in the middle of a body of water. Josué believed this environment provided spiritual protection against harmful entities and minimized the danger that he felt would inevitably accompany public discussion of his past. Josué's appearance during the encounter was striking and kind of unsettling. He wore entirely dark clothing adorned with various occult and ritualistic symbols. His most notable accessory was a glove covering his right hand, hiding the infamous Ring of King Solomon, a cursed ring Josué had previously admitted could not be removed from his finger. Upon meeting the team, Josué was visibly anxious, frequently avoiding eye contact and appearing evasive or restless. He also exhibited a peculiar behavior during greetings, like he warmly shook hands with Juan Ramón Sáenz using his right hand, which was supposedly the cursed hand, while only offering his left hand to the other crew members, including interviewer Mario Estrada and the cameraman. This selective interaction heightened the tension and set an eerie tone for the entire meeting. So there they were, on a boat in the body of water that Josué wanted. And throughout the conversation, he displayed clear signs of discomfort and was visibly distressed. But Juan Ramón Sáenz was also acting a little strange, like he frequently placed his hands on his stomach, seemingly as a defensive gesture. All this got a little worse once Josué started experiencing sudden and intense episodes of convulsions, described as energetic attacks from malevolent entities, angered by his public revelations. The crew themselves noticed disturbances, including unusual feelings of discomfort, nausea, and inexplicable physical sensations. The objects Josué carried with him were also highly disturbing. He brought occult artifacts, notably a human femur bone, one that he referred to as his sentinel, bound by powerful ritualistic spells meant to protect him during sleep. He also possessed a bundle, a potent piece of witchcraft designed to restrain negative energies and entities. Josué explained openly that these objects were necessary defenses, given the spiritual violence he regularly experienced. During the interview, Josué hinted darkly about his past interactions with influential people, including politicians and other powerful figures, some who participated in occult rituals. Now, while he refused to reveal any specific names, He admitted that these individuals had a vested interest in keeping their activities secret and could potentially cause harm to him if their identities were revealed. She described these people as very powerful and dangerous, increasing the paranoia surrounding the whole encounter. Following the face-to-face interview, a series of tragic and bizarre events unfolded very quickly, impacting several people directly involved with the production. The cameraman, Luis Ernesto, experienced medical problems immediately after filming, requiring emergency surgery. He developed serious abdominal issues, leading many involved to suspect a link between the filming and a sudden illness. Mario Estrada, the interviewer and reporter, suffered a severe and unexplainable car accident shortly after filming. Mario described the incident as highly unusual. He had been driving calmly, with no apparent hazards or traffic, when suddenly a vehicle appeared, forcing him into a violent crash against the pole. He sustained injuries and trauma from the accident. But the worst was for our beloved host, Juan Ramón Sáenz. He had assisted Josué spiritually and had interviewed him extensively, and he died unexpectedly shortly after the meeting. His sudden death led to widespread speculation and controversy, with many attributing his demise to a spiritual retaliation, one from the dark energy surrounding Josué. The pattern of tragedies and accidents around those involved with Josué raised alarms among the production team and public. Many concluded that these events were not mere coincidences, but rather direct results of coming into contact with Josué and the dark spiritual energies associated with him. And given the timing, shortly after the meeting with Josué, many people believe that Josué's powerful dark connections or the entities associated with him had retaliated against Juan Ramón. Josué himself strongly denied intentional involvement, but openly acknowledged that negative energies associated with him could have indirectly influenced or affected vulnerable people, including Juan Ramón Sáenz. Now, making the situation just a little more eerie was the unexpected death of Pastor Roberto Guaso, who had provided Josué spiritual assistance years earlier during the initial radio call. The pastor died shortly after Juan Ramón Sáenz, intensifying public suspicion that anyone connected closely with Josué was at severe spiritual risk. Josué again distanced himself with direct responsibility, claiming that Pastor Guaso's death might have been caused by his weakened spiritual state, making him vulnerable to negative entities. However, the pastor's death shortly after Josué's interview solidified a narrative of danger around Josué. Of course, a chain of tragic events sparked intense media coverage, especially since each incident seemed to directly target individuals, some that were closely associated with Josué's case. Paranormal experts, spiritual leaders, and commentators openly debated whether Josué himself was still spiritually entangled with the demonic entities, despite his claims of seeking freedom and redemption. Here's where the public became divided in opinion. Some viewed Josué as a victim trying to break free from evil, while others feared that he was still a dangerous individual whose dark energies actively harmed those around him. Josué repeatedly denied direct involvement or intent to harm anyone. However, he openly acknowledged that his powerful connection to dark forces likely allowed residual negative energies to affect those in proximity to him. He described the situation as being like fire. If you come too close unprotected, harm is inevitable, even if unintentional. And he stuck with this story, arguing that these tragic events were not on purpose, nor did they result from specific rituals he performed. Instead, he attributed them to collateral spiritual damage and unfortunate side effects of this proximity and prior involvement with powerful demonic forces. So he still denies being personally responsible or having consciously intended Juan Ramón Sáenz's death. Josué actually expresses genuine sadness at the passing of Juan Ramón Sáenz, emphasizing that Juan Ramón had previously helped him at a critical moment, going so far as to personally visiting him when he was hospitalized after a serious spiritual attack. He states clearly that he experienced sorrow upon hearing of Juan Ramón's death, describing it as very sad, and he maintains respect and gratitude toward Juan Ramón Sáenz for his past support. In the footage from that last interview, Juan Ramón Sáenz mentions that once he got the call, strange things started happening in the recording room. Cold air or a certain coldness coming out from under the desk at one point. The Bible started rolling up while they were on the call with the priest. This last interview was strange. Nobody knew where the interview was going to take place until the last minute. They were driving to a secret location determined by Josué, and eventually he decided on the boat thing. And as an analysis of this last interview continues, the producer of this new show, air.Normal, they can see how Juan Ramón Sáenz is holding his hands over his stomach, acting pretty uncomfortable. One thing that Josué has mentioned in several interviews after is that these entities actually wanted Juan Ramón Sáenz dead. I also found some footage of the ring that was being removed from Josué's hand in a desperate attempt to save him from these entities. It was a pretty bizarre ritual that was recorded. Now, it was so bad that if the ring would have been unable to be removed, it would have been chopped off with literally a machete that they had there ready to go. Today, he says that he is clear of everything and will use his powers to do good. But only time will be the judge of that. When I dove into this topic, of course I thought of my own shows and the strange things that have happened during the recordings. Like during a call with Amy, a woman who had told me about faceless demons that surrounded her while she was sleeping. I had multiple incidents of a lamp flickering with no explanation. It happened to interact whenever the word demon was mentioned, and I try to consider it a coincidence. After the recording, we had some issues with the actual audio, and then the editing of that, and the upload of that same audio. Now, about a year later, my sister came into my studio to print something out when she casually asked me if anything creepy had ever happened in there. And I told her about Amy and her story with the demons, and just as I said it, my sister screamed. An LED sign that I had behind me flickered. That thing has never flickered since. Can these entities travel through stories, such as this one? And how can we protect ourselves if they do, and prevent such a case like what happened with the beloved host, Juan Ramón Sáenz? There's lots of things we don't know or understand about the world we live in. Entities may be surrounding us right now as we listen to this, and we wouldn't know. But like I say with lots of the stories that we cover on here, let's question everything and keep an open mind. And for those of us who decide to go searching, protect yourselves. This episode was written and produced by me, Edwin Covarrubias. If you're curious about the stories and interviews mentioned in this episode, I can send you over some links, although they are in Spanish. Translations in English might be available depending on the platforms. You can support me and my shows by trying out Scary Plus or dropping a review for me. And for ideas, email me or send me a DM. I'll leave my contact info in the description of this episode. We're also doing live streams weekly on YouTube and Instagram, and you can check when the next one's scheduled by visiting our channels there. If you're following the show, I'll tell you another horror story or mystery next week. Thank you very much for listening. Keep it scary, everyone. See you soon.